live in a world where I'm not entitled to express myself and say what I think and, call truth to the situation as I see it. There are so many hateful people in the world who just blather, and no one ever holds them accountable. No one ever tells them to shut up. No one, they go off on, I've given a lot of thought to what I think, and people say I'm outspoken, but I'm actually very measured in what I think. You don't want to know, what I'm holding back on.
Hello and welcome to the Z3 podcast. I am Amitai Fraiman, the director of the Z3 project, and this is our podcast. On today's episode, I have a conversation with the comedian and actor and influencer, Daniel-Ryan Spaulding. He became famous recently with a viral video post the October 7 massacre in which he criticizes the hypocrisy of some voices in the progressive camp. We have an interesting conversation about his journey professionally and personally, and learning about his motivations and his relationship to the Jewish community in Israel and what pushed him to step into the spotlight, so to speak, and take a stance, such a vocal stance in support of Israel in times like this. The conversation is quite interesting and amusing at times. I encourage you to take a listen and follow us on our various platforms, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Join our mailing list if you'd like, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So, Daniel, it's a pleasure to welcome you here to our podcast.
Thank you, Amitai. Thank you, Rabbi Amitai.
Yeah, that's the correct one. No, it's a pleasure to have you here, really. I'm excited for this conversation. As I mentioned to you, on this podcast, we host folks and we sit in conversation with them to hear about their work, their background, in a way that is relevant to our audiences, which care about current events and things that relate to Jewish life in Israel and the relationship between diaspora Jewry and Israel. And I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute and tell your backstory. But just for our audiences, you very recently became, there was a video of yours that became extremely viral, right? That put you in the spotlight in a topic that I don't know if you would characterize it as a normal topic you would, cover in your comedy. And we'll get there, but that is, I guess, the background here and why we're so thrilled to have you here and hear your journey so far. So maybe for the benefit of our audience, maybe start with telling us a little bit about your own background.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and I went to school there. I'm not Jewish. I actually didn't really know that many Jewish people growing up. I went to university in Canada. I studied film and theater. It was always sort of my plan to be an actor. And then in my early 20s, I worked a little bit as an actor, but I ended up getting into stand-up comedy. And that's really when I realized that's what my passion was and what I was best at. Because even with acting, I was always geared more towards humor. And I was a writer as well. I wrote lots of plays and stuff. And I ended up becoming a stand-up comedian. And I left Canada when I was 25. I went to Australia for a year, and then I moved to Europe and sort of built an international career for myself. I lived in Amsterdam for 4 years, and I lived in Norway for a year. And then I was living in Berlin up until recently. And when the past 5 years, I've been living in Berlin, just sort of as a base to be touring and traveling all throughout Europe. I have quite a big career in Europe. And then when I was living in Berlin, I ended up becoming friends with different Israelis because Berlin and Tel Aviv are very interconnected, especially with artists and with the techno music scene. So there's a lot of Israelis in Berlin. And so I ended up visiting Israel. I didn't know that much about Israel. I can actually, it'll be interesting if we could talk a bit about some of the misconceptions I used to have about Israel.
Yes.
And then I ended up, performing there and spending more time there. Over the past 4 years, I've probably cumulatively spent about 2 months in Tel Aviv, visited maybe 6 or 7 times. I've had writing projects there. Even before this, I could sell out a 500-seat theater in Tel Aviv. I have a lot of fans in Tel Aviv. So after October 7th, seeing the response from people was so horrifying to me. And I didn't realize that people had so many misconceptions about Israel. And I forgot that I used to think the same way. And so the first video I did was just sort of saying, hi, hey, like, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They'd kill you too. It was shocking to me that so many liberal people and so many queer people could somehow be justifying such a mass murder and rape, and it was just so horrifying to me. And so that's sort of what my first video was about. And I thought that people would sort of wake up, but it only seems to have gotten worse and worse. Yeah. So I've had to kind of just keep going and lean into it. And around the start of everything, I moved to New York. I moved to New York on October 16th.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up, getting involved with the Jews of New York and that whole scene. And it just sort of, I got invited to the United Nations and to do events with the Israeli mission. And it just sort of snowballed from there.
And here we are in Palo Alto.
And here we are in Palo Alto.
So, I mean, you covered a huge arc there. And I do want to focus on some of those areas and break it up into moments. So you're like the piece of the international career, and I'm going to come back to the other pieces as well. The impetus there of like a global citizen traveling the world, seeing different cultures and trying out different things, was the motivation behind it, or was there?
Yeah, I had a real thirst for experience and adventure. I had grown up in sort of the suburbs of Vancouver, sort of never really traveling. We didn't really have a lot of money growing up. So, and Canada is just so boring. It's so boring and sleepy, and it's beautiful for nature, but I really don't care about nature at all. Like, there's nothing worse for me than being in a forest. Like, I get bored out of my skull. Yeah. So, I ended up building this career, and I've performed in over 50 countries. Right. There were months and months at a time where I would just be living out of a suitcase, wow. 5 cities, 5 different cities in a week or something like that. So
that's pretty intense.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it.
Yeah. So you ended up in Berlin. That's where you made your first connection with Israelis and kind of deepened that relationship. And then there's the video, and I think the first piece that I'm curious to hear, and you can expand. And I know you mentioned it kind of now in passing, but like, what if you can identify? Like, yes, there was the October 7th. There's the massacre and the violence and all that for sure. But what drove you to make that, to take a step? You said, you're not a member of the Jewish community in that sense. Probably, right. Say you're an honorary member at this point, right?
Well, I was traveling when it happened. I was in Scotland, I think that morning, and I was with a friend, and we heard about it just sort of like we didn't fully process it. And then I went to London, and I did a matinee show. And then I was having drinks with my sister after. She was in London, and she explained to me a little more about what happened. And I was like, I still couldn't really process it. And I had to take a flight. I did my show, and then I flew back to Berlin. And then when I got back to Berlin, I really saw what had happened. And then I saw a really good friend of mine post a story saying Palestine has the right to defend itself. Mm. And I messaged him and I said, do you understand what happened? Like, this was a terrorist attack. Like, they murdered innocent people. And he said, yeah, well, how else are they supposed to get their land back? And I said, I don't think you really understand the situation. And it was just like so mind-boggling to me. And I told him, like, I was just there like a week ago. If I had been murdered or kidnapped, would you just think that was fine? And he said, well, maybe you shouldn't be going there. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how blind he was to the situation. And so it was very disturbing to me. Yeah. And as I saw more of that, I realized, okay, like, I need to say something on behalf of my friends, on behalf of what's true, on behalf of what's moral. I have to say something.
And so you made the video. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the response immediately was?
Well, I was leaving as well. It was my last day in Berlin, and I went to Amsterdam, and then I think I did go back to Berlin. I was only in Berlin like another week.
Right.
So I didn't really fully see so much consequence to it, but and also I was hit with bots. So there was a bot attack. So it was just like within like a few minutes, like there was 10,000
Wow.
comments of Palestinian flags. So I couldn't really see all the comments as well. So I had to change the settings of my account. So for the most part, it was a lot of people, lots of Israelis and Jews sharing it, and people, sharing the video. But I did notice right away there were comments that were like, from young gay people being like, you should speak for yourself. You support genocide. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Like, I'm going to hide your comment just because I'm so embarrassed for you. And now, 4 months later, we see that people are not understanding the reality of this situation.
Yeah, it's
getting worse and worse.
It's getting worse and worse, and I think there's a few sides here. There's a side that is interesting. I don't know how many people appreciate is the fact that there's this whole industry of bots.
Yeah.
Right, and like that we're not even the content that we create or consume is pushed up and down by an algorithm or by these different organizations. I guess we're pushing these bot farms. And I don't know that much about it, even though we live here in Silicon Valley. And the other piece, which I think is interesting, is the human response to it.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm curious if you've seen a difference in response from your different audiences. You've been to 50 countries, right, all across the whole world. Are you seeing or is it really all over the place?
Well, I've predominantly, like over the past 4 months, I've just been in New York. I'm just very confused. I'm very confused about what people think. I'm confused about how people perceive things. I'm confused about what information they have. I think that at first I thought people were just intensely anti-Semitic, and I think that is true. But there's also a lot of people that I think just don't know anything and don't care to know anything and are kind of okay being willingly ignorant, or just don't want to think about it and it doesn't affect them. But it affects everyone, because one of the biggest signs of a society that's falling into extremism is anti-Semitism. And from what I have seen through my videos, not only have my videos unveiled how much anti-Semitism there is in the left, but also how much homophobia there is in the left, for the fact of me as a gay man speaking out against Israel, or speaking out for Israel or for Jewish people. This whole concept of being a pink washer and being privileged, this idea of the privileged, callous gay man who doesn't care about the suffering of others, who, these gay sex tourists who go to Israel and just want to party and don't actually care about the human rights abuses that Israel commits. This concept of pink washing is a propaganda tool. And I think that in the same way, Jews experience hate from both the extreme right and the extreme left, gay men also experience hate from the extreme right and the extreme left. So I think that what we're seeing right now is an indication that our society is falling into extremism.
Yeah.
And it seems to be getting worse and worse very, very rapidly. So, it's scary.
It is scary. It is scary. And I think, I very much appreciate the fact how you're naming it. There's a threat from the right, there's a threat from the left, from the extremes. And I think that the underlying current here is the dangers of extremism, period. And
also the dangers of only having empathy for your group. What does that look like as a society if we're put into these echo chambers where we're only socializing and interacting with and engaging with people that have the exact same opinions as us, or this carved out information? What does that look like in our world as we go about our day when we see people as the other? It doesn't lead to good things.
It doesn't lead to good things. And I think that the way that I often interpret some of the online discourse is that they the world is split into there's two camps in the world, right? There's the oppressor and the oppressed, and you cannot, it's way easier to fit the world into those two. But the problem is that what happens when we start meddling and mixing up those things, it's not so easy, right? So yourself, as you're saying, you find the homophobia from the left, right? And it is a minority, and we know, and I've seen, the campaigns you've done online with the yellow star and the pink triangle afterwards, right? And all those things that are interconnected. And instead of having these interconnected or overlapping issues of hatred and extremism, instead of it solving it, right, and being maybe a key for where we can figure out how to work together across differences, it becomes a cudgel to kind of drive differences, right? And saying you can either be an oppressor or an oppressed, right? And the fact that they find someone like yourself who complicates that narrative for them,
right? Exactly.
They don't know what to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that, there's lots of different things that we could talk about, but one of the things that I've realized lately, and Elika Laban, do you know her? She's an Iranian activist. Okay. She's made this point, and I think it's a really great point, which is that I think over the past 5 years, we have had a lot of really difficult conversations about systemic racism, about the oppression of women, Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, all of these big ideas, and looking at society and thinking about injustice and systemic abuse, right? So I think in terms of where that has gotten us, unfortunately, is this place where things are very at a very reductive level. Yeah. Where, especially the left, there's this underlying white guilt or Western guilt. Okay. So in terms of something complicated, like looking at Israel and Palestine, looking at the idea of the fact that Hamas murders gay people, throws them off rooftops, executes them, hangs them, kills them, your average person, if they were your normal thinking person, would look at that and think, oh, this gay person who's being, executed by this Islamist terrorist, this is the person I need to protect. But we've gotten to this point where Western guilt and white guilt clouds our judgment, and leftist people are supposed to give the benefit of the doubt to this Islamist terrorist because they don't want to be perceived as Islamophobic. So all of these buzzwords have come into play in terms of looking at this situation. We're just supposed to not look at the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization. We're supposed to only look at Israel and their perceived oppression of Palestinians. And we're not supposed to ever hold Hamas accountable, because that would be racist, Islamophobic. They've built all of these little buzzwords to try to ease their internalized white privilege, guilt, Western privilege, apartheid, colonialist, racist, Islamophobic, genocide, all of these little buzzwords that basically take the blame off of Hamas and never allows them to go deeper in their thinking. Things are at a very shallow, reductive level. Yeah. And each time they get a little dopamine hit off of these buzzwords, and it prevents them from really thinking critically, thinking about systems of accountability and differentiation. No, not all Muslim or Arab people are terrorists. We know that. Israelis know that. But that ideology, that jihadist ideology, does exist, and it's a problem, and it is the main source of why this conflict is happening. Both things are true. Right. And in order for us to protect peace-loving Muslims and peace-loving Arabs, and for there to be peace, we have to acknowledge that jihadism exists. And it's especially important for people on the left to do that because we can make that differentiation. The extreme right is, a lot of those people are racist and they don't make that distinction. Right. So, this is a nuanced conversation. Yeah. And also in terms of, holding the Netanyahu government accountable and how Israel deals with problems, that's also, there's room for that conversation too.
Certainly.
But you can't look at this situation and say that Hamas is some sort of resistance movement, or try to do these, mental gymnastics in your mind to justify terrorism and rape and murder. And it's at best it's dumb, at worst it's evil.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, that point of we've been now in this moment where we've had several very difficult conversations at a societal level over the past 5 years. And the problem is that we actually don't have the right platforms to have those conversations on, because social media is the worst.
Yeah.
Everything has to be short, has to be buzzwordy, right? It has to give you a dopamine hit every time someone gives you a like or a share or whatever. And so instead of being a place where you can ultimately bridge gaps and differences and bring people closer together, it drives people apart, and it creates these echo chambers, and you cannot have these complicated conversations because they're complex. We have, it's not all Palestinians, it's not all Arabs, it's not all Muslims, it's not at all, right? And is Israel perfect? Of course it's not perfect. Ask any Israeli off the street and they'll tell you a long list of grievances that they have with the government and with the, the different policies at hand and whatnot. But it's impossible, it seems, that it's impossible to have these types of conversations in a meaningful way. And so once you did that, once that video, you leaned into it, right? That one viral thing?
No, I think it was sort of like towards the end of the year when I realized how big of a problem it was becoming. And I think when I realized, when I was asked to to speak on behalf of the hostage families in New York, that's sort of when I realized, okay, I'm all in now. This is something that I have to commit to, and I really need to help these people. The fact that no celebrity or anyone would, help the hostage families and speak out for them and advocate for them, it was very puzzling to me. And it just really broke my heart. And I felt like, okay, if Oprah isn't going to do it, if Angelina Jolie isn't, if all of these multi-millionaires with all their power and all their influence either don't want to or are too scared to, and here's my opportunity to do something good, I'll take it.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, that courage. Where you
I didn't really think about it. I think I didn't really think it through. Like, I just did what felt right. But, and even now, I don't entirely, it's difficult, and I see that there are consequences. I see that it annoys people, or it bothers people, or, people have bad reactions to it. But I can't live in a world where I'm not entitled to express myself and say what I think and, call truth to the situation as I see it. There are so many hateful people in the world who just blather, and no one ever holds them accountable. No one ever tells them to shut up. No one, they go off on, I've given a lot of thought to what I think, and people say I'm outspoken, but I'm actually very measured in what I think. You don't want to know, what I'm holding back on, but my God, I don't really, I have moral clarity over this situation. I see how horrible and tragic it is, and I want the war to stop, and I never wanted there to be a war. Yeah. This is the thing people aren't understanding. Israel didn't want this war. They didn't want this escalation. Israeli people did not want this.
Yeah. And it's an interesting point that you raise that, because I think that part of what gets lost, certainly in social media, and I know this even as an Israeli within an American kind of context, and I really liked how you kind of made that distinction. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, right? But it's very easy in our world today to talk about, Israel or the government, right? Or the US, or right, and as opposed to the people. And in Israel in particular, I think that folks are very connected for a million reasons to, the country and we serve and all that stuff. But we also get very offended when we're interchanged with the government, right? And because yes, there's policies and decisions, but it's so, but it's such a small country that we can't remove ourselves so much from it, right? It's not like we're going to several hundred million country, like, the government somewhere there, far away from me.
Yeah.
Like, it's so, there are no degrees of separation.
Yeah.
And so you ask Israelis, they'd be like, no, we don't want this war. We're not into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, and also it's like thinking that every American, supports Donald Trump and the things that he says.
Right.
It's a democracy. Israel is a democracy. People disagree. They have different opinions. And, what's so interesting about the advocacy work that I'm doing and what's so great about the Jewish community is that what people don't realize is there is every different kind of Jew imaginable. It's a microcosm of the world. Jews are all over the world. They represent the world. And I think that that's, in a way, what's going to end up, saving the Jews is that everyone can speak to their different audience. There is nothing that I have in common with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro and Daniel-Ryan Spaulding have nothing in common. Yet, in terms of Israel, we agree on, the fact that Israel should exist, that, all of these different things. We advocate for Israel, but, he talks to his audience. I talk to my audience. Right. Michael Rappaport has his audience. Tiffany Haddish has her audience. Lizzie Savetsky has her audience. Everyone has their different microcosm of society that we can speak to and explain things.
And so in the world of audiences, have you found, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, like the response of your audiences, right? You have, I'm sure you've gained quite a few. Have you seen pushback?
I don't know. It's all very confusing to me because I left Berlin like just so shortly after and was sort of building a new life for myself in New York. So I don't really know what people think. I don't know. I don't know if they care. I don't know. I've seen a lot of things that have made me very uneasy. People have made comments. I've had certain friends send me very disgusting messages saying things that I'm motivated by wanting fame or wanting money or that I'm on the Zionist payroll.
About that,
that's
can you
the
tell
thing.
me?
Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really acknowledging overtly that I wasn't Jewish when I started this because I felt like with people thinking I was Jewish, there was this level of protection where I wouldn't get so many threats or so much hate because even though those people are anti-Semitic, they don't want to appear anti-Semitic. But then Noah Tishby sort of outed me in our collaboration video. And since then, it's been something that Jewish people really want me to say that I'm not Jewish because they think it validates the cause, and it does. But there is that, now I have to deal with the problem of people thinking, oh, well, why is he doing this?
Yeah. What's the
what does he get out of it? It couldn't be that, oh, I understand the situation because I've been to Israel and I've talked to people and I know more about the situation than you, and I care about my friends who are Israeli, and I don't want Jewish people to be assaulted or, threatened or stalked, and I want Israel as a country to exist. It couldn't be that. I must be getting something out of it. So it's just very disheartening, and I feel sorry for them more than anything. Yeah. And I feel sorry for them that they're, these friends that I've lost, I feel sorry for them for not realizing that I'm a good person and that I'm doing the right thing. It's sad.
Yeah, it is a sad state of affairs. So you mentioned in the beginning that when you started going to Israel, you learned or unlearned some things.
Yeah. So this is something that's really interesting. I remember, in hindsight, in around 2015, there was a war over the summer or something. Joan Rivers was coming back and TMZ stopped her at the airport. Do you remember that video?
Yeah.
And they asked her about Selena Gomez posting something about pro-Palestine. And she was like, I don't understand it. Don't people realize Hamas, they're terrorists, they're terrorists. And I was such a big Joan Rivers fan. And I remember seeing that video and thinking, oh, I am so disappointed in you, Joan Rivers. You just don't get it. How could you be that blind to what is going on? And I was like 30. I had gone to university. I had traveled the world, but I had never had Jewish friends and I'd never been to Israel. And anytime I ever heard about the conflict, the only visual of Israel I had was like little clips of like extreme right-wing settler violence in the West Bank, or, you know, some extreme right-wing Netanyahu kind of politician. And that was sort of my whole perception of Israel. And even when I met Israelis, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, it must be so horrible for them to have that awful government. And to like, how do they just, like, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, how do they think of Palestinians? Like, do they know what their government's doing? Are they speaking out against how awful their government is treating Palestinians? And the conflict was always explained to me that there's Palestinians and there's Israelis. And Israel's oppressing, Israel's oppressing, Israel's oppressing. It never even occurred to me once that the problem would be Palestinian leadership oppressing their own people, not agreeing to peace. Never occurred to me.
Yeah.
And even when I went there the first couple times, I went to the West Bank, and I remember going to the Banksy Hotel, like there's like an exhibit there, and just being so sad about the whole thing and saying to my friend, I just don't understand why they can't live in peace. I mean, this wall is just so awful. And my friend was like, well, you know, there are terrorists here. Like, we do need to protect ourselves. And I remember thinking, yeah, but they're just terrorists because of how badly you treat them. It's like this ideological block. And it took me, I think I had to go another couple times, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know that Gaza was a part of Egypt and the West Bank was a part of Jerusalem. I didn't know that they had been offered peace treaties and turned them down each time. I didn't know that when the country was formed, they had the option of forming their country at the same time. I didn't know about British Mandate Palestine and all the different empires over the past 2,000 years that the land had been transferred into. Yeah. I didn't, even the fact that there was that it is the indigenous place of the Jewish people, and there was an established kingdom of Israel. I was just sort of, someone told me in my early 20s, they were like, yeah, I get it. It was like this very anti-Semitic person, and they said something like, yeah, I get it. So they reclaimed their land. But if a First Nations person came knocking on my door wanting my land back, I'd have a problem with that. And I remembered thinking, oh, okay. And that was the only, the only thing that entered my mind. Like, oh yeah, that's not fair. And so I was so ignorant, even though I was an educated person, even though I was a grown-up, even though I was well-traveled, I didn't understand it. And there are all these ideological blocks put in place to prevent people from going to Israel, from looking at the situation objectively. And so, it's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate because now, it's just so clear to me, and some people they can't see it.
Yeah. So why do you, from your experience in your environment, someone's grown outside of it, and what's the fascination, or why is there such a block? I'm an Israeli, grew up, Jewish, the whole thing, and I don't have that outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe there's.
Well, I think that there's so much. Well, there is a level of ideological subversion. This has been a calculated plan for the past 20 years to poison the education system, especially of America, like universities and colleges. Like it's just a fact. Look at, the Canary mission, look at the work of Noah Tishby. It's all there, it's all unveiled. This is a part of a plan to bring down Israel, to bring down Western civilization. It's there. And, the fact that the presidents of universities, when asked, is it okay to, allow people to call for the genocide of Jews, they smirked and said, it depends on the context. Like, what normal thinking person could ever think that that's an okay response? Like, the left is anti-Semitic. It is raging anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism, it's like a mind virus. It's a very ancient, old form of hatred. And it's a tool used by people to subvert an ideology and to get people thinking conspiracy theories. And that was already a problem because during COVID, young people became so disillusioned and, paranoid and thinking that the world and the system is rigged against them. And to a degree, yeah, like the world is problematic. But at the same time, I'd much rather live in Western civilization than any other country in the world. So let's make things better. Let's not tear it down. I think that we need to have a lot of serious conversations before it gets worse.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I feel like every day it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. So how do you understand the role of comedy in this, right? As someone who this has been your art form for some time now, and I'd like to think of comedy as truth telling and a prophetic voice of our time, because you can really cut through a lot of noise to make a point. How do you?
Well, I created my web series Purple Hair Girl, which is basically like a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Okay.
Have you seen Purple Hair Girl?
No, but I've seen Mr. Rogers.
Oh, okay. So basically it's a children's show for adults.
Okay.
And I play sort of this Mr. Rogers character. And I'm trying to help my friend, the Purple Hair Girl, who's become a raging Jew hater. And so every episode is like a different topic. So we go through colonialism, apartheid, white supremacy, all of these misconceptions about Israel. And I explain to her the reality of the situation and explain basic facts about Israel and anti-Semitism so she doesn't destroy Western civilization. So then I also play Purple Hair Girl, and I have a purple wig. And so I play one of these anti-Semitic college kids. And so that has been a fun tool for me. And because my goal was with Purple Hair Girl, I don't think we can change the minds of these kids. Like, some of them are too poisoned. But if we can give people that they have relationships with the information to be able to talk to them, that might be a way to solve the problem. Because the only way I was able to learn and unlearn all of the misconceptions I had about Israel was through forming friendships with Israelis and asking them questions and learning and asking them more questions and then checking their answers and doing research and just getting more information. So I think that even though I think the Purple Hair Girl series was very popular in terms of views, not necessarily in terms of comments and likes, because people are scared to even like something or comment on something or share something because they don't want to be seen as taking sides. But I did get a lot of information out there, and I didn't want it to be sort of anti-woke porn because I'm not a right-wing person. But if that is the way to solve this I think that you can be empathetic. Like, the entire series, I keep saying, we believe in you, Purple Hair Girl. You're not a bad person. I think a little bit of empathy, a little bit of information, and also a little bit of mockery and shaming, because you can't go around saying these things and spouting this kind of hatred and doing things that are harmful and thinking that there are going to be no consequences. So if the consequences is that someone holds up a mirror to you, I'm sorry, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how do we think about, instinctively, right? I'm very much, I identify very much with the passion and level of commitment that you have towards truth telling and exposing viewers and audiences to how you understand what's going on in the Middle East, and I applaud that immensely. What I find myself struggling with often is that because of the platform, we too have to lean into the simplifying of it.
Yeah.
Right. And how do we not lose sight of some of the more difficult things that are going on? For example, I myself, the tail end of my service in 2009, I was in Gaza in a tank, and very different scenario for what's going on now, for sure. But it's not like war is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Right. War is a terrible thing. And how do we walk the line? We're not valorizing what I perceive as a last resort. Right?
Yeah.
We were forced on, dragged into, not initiated by Israel, but still, like, do I want to romanticize it? I don't want to romanticize it. Right. Like, I think the distinction, for example, here's where it comes. We're like, you have to be either pro-war or anti-war. And I'm like, how about we be anti-war, period, but understand that sometimes it's necessary.
I agree.
Right. And like, how do we think about the end game?
And also build peace.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just have war. That's, I think, one of the things that has been missing in this conflict, is that you have to create peace in the aftermath of war.
Yeah. And
what I genuinely hope is that in whatever rebuilding or reconstruction of Gaza happens, that with the replacement of UNRWA and with all of these systems that have kept this problem going, that there might be a chance, to have real peace and to build something that is substantial. And, with other Arab nations being involved, that there could be some sort of coalition to help these people to, put in the money for education and not have that money be, stolen or by corrupt people and terrorist groups. Like, let's really make sure that there's, a system in place to protect these people and give them a chance.
Right. And
so whatever 10-year or 20-year plan there could be for some sort, like in the same way Berlin had a plan to be reconstructed, I think that could it could work. And I want to encourage, my Israeli friends and liberal people in Israel, because they're going to be the ones to try to put something together to make things happen. And as horrifying as things are, you do have to try to work towards some solution, because these people can't just be killing each other forever. Right. There has to be some sort of, obviously not now, there can't be a two-state solution now, but let's put a plan in place. Even if they're not necessarily having their own nation, but it's something like Puerto Rico, where it's a self-governing thing that's a part, you know what I mean? And we also have to find out what the fuck happened and what do they think? What do they want? How do they see, there has to be, we need more information. Yeah, we need more information. There've been models of places who de-radicalize their societies through education. This isn't a new thing, and we have to invest in it. I think that I appreciate how it's necessary to be in the moment and kind of like pushing back against anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and lies against and this, what you're calling a conspiratorial mindset, which I think is very much there. You see some of the stuff that's out there it's really insane. Yeah. Really insane. Also, one thing, I don't understand why the word Zionist is used so much. That, as if this is even relevant. The country exists. Yeah. The idea of, what is a Zion? It's already a country. It's so insane to me. None of it, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, a lot of it's all over the place. And I think that we deal with that question here a lot of the Zionism question. What does that even mean? And there are people in Israel, notable journalists who are that word needs to be retired altogether. This is a country. And others will say, well,
it's an emotional state. It's a part of the identity. It's a yearning for for sovereignty. So it's never really ending. Herzl says Zionism is a never-ending ideal, and so there's like these. It depends how you talk about it. What I find,
At some point, you got to get over things.
Yeah, what I find unhelpful in it is exactly that the state exists.
Yeah.
Right. Like the undoing of the state. Right. The conversation about Israel's right to exist and legitimacy, I find redundant because it is, right? We can talk about improvement. We can talk about ways to figure out and move forward in peace and education and coexistence and yes, two states or whatever the solution people think is a solution, but it's not about we're going to reverse the clock and like undo the founding of a state. There's 9 million people there. It's a mixed society. There's Jews and non-Jews live there together. And so I find that mode of the conversation a little bit, it's like talking to flat earthers,
Yeah. Well, at this point it is. Yeah. Like, it's like they're the new QAnon people.
Yeah.
But the thing is I don't know how many of them there are.
I don't know. It goes back to those bot farms that you had.
Because I feel like I don't understand why most people don't want to talk about it or speak out. Like, if this is like, if most people think like you or I, or at the very least, like if 82% of Americans side with Israel over Hamas, why is it that we aren't seeing people talk out or speak out about it more?
That was a question earlier when you said about celebrities not speaking. Like where you showed a moment of you showed courage in stepping out. You could have easily said, you could have done anything up to the point of publishing. So this is despicable. I know it's a lie. I don't care about it. I don't care for it. But I'm not going to go out there. But taking that step, and I do. I think,
but this is the problem. I feel like that's why it's so scary, because I feel like all the bad things are co-aligning at once. So we have like the anti-Semitism, and then we have all the misinformation, years of grooming, and then we have this sort of radicalized fervor, and already there's this conspiracy theory kind of stuff happening. Right. And then we have this social media world where we're falling into echo chambers. We're only like seeing, the opinions of people that agree with us and the information of people. We're getting different information. And then we're also, unfortunately, obsessed with our status and our popularity. Like we're 12-year-old babies in high school who are scared that people are not going to want to be friends with us. Right. Or these celebrities where they're so obsessed with their following and how much money they're making and off of their popularity. And so it's like all of these different bad things are aligning, and it's terrifying.
So how do we solve for it?
Well, I think we have to just keep doing what we're doing and not give up, and just every day keep speaking the truth and hoping that others will as well. At some point, people are going to have to, wake up. Like, once there's terrorism happening everywhere and people's safety is at risk, they're going to at some point notice if there's, people being stabbed or hurt or shot. But this is the thing, in America, there's mass shootings all the time. So what does it matter if it's at a synagogue? This is like what I worry about all the time. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying. It's terrifying to see where the violence comes from. Politically, where the violence against synagogues comes often from the right, but we're seeing a rise in real physical violence also from the left. And you said it so eloquently in the beginning about not losing sight how we have, it's a world that is now falling into extremes.
Yes.
And it's not about figuring out, who, this whole debate of like who's worse, right? There's the left or the right. And I'm like, why do we have to pick?
No.
No. Unfortunately, we don't have to.
And the same people on the right who are going after Jews are also going after gays, gay men. Yeah. The same people who are saying, this is a Zionist conspiracy. The Jews are trying to replace us. The Jews control the world. Are the same people, trying to accuse gay men of being pedophiles or having sex trafficking rings. And then on the extreme left, the same, even like gay Jewish people who are self-hating Jews, who think Israel should not exist. They're the same people who think that where gay men are pink washers and are cruel and entitled. It's on both sides, both for gay men and Jews. And that's why I make the point of saying there's a reason gay men and Jews were both in concentration camps.
Yeah.
This is an indication of a society that is falling into extremism and radicalized thinking.
Yeah. So I don't want to end on like a negative note.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
It's like
That's okay.
yeah. But so you're back in the States.
Yes.
You're
So
settling in New York.
I'm not American.
Right.
This is my
You're Canadian.
first time living here.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm Israeli, so if you're back in this, like I'm like, the States,
America.
America.
Yeah. No, so I moved. I got an O1 visa,
Okay.
so I can live here for 3 years, and then I can get a
Awesome.
green card.
That's-
It was hard to get. Well, it didn't take that long. I had a good lawyer and everything, but yeah, it's like the Alien of Extraordinary Abilities visa.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm getting my European citizenship just so I can still work in Europe. But I'm going to be, so I'm going back next month
Okay.
to clean out my apartment. I'm going to go to Israel as well, which will be great. It's so funny, like, it's so interesting to me too, like how I can see it so clearly now as an outsider, like how, in a way, having Israel, this country where no one experiences anti-Semitism, it's such a beautiful thing, but then it's also such a problematic thing because Israelis don't recognize how, like, it must be so puzzling to grow up in a Jewish world where you have Hebrew and your custom and your language, and then to step out and see how much hate there is in the world.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'm trying to like reflect on my own upbringing. My parents are American,
Yeah.
so when we came to visit or we were in Europe, there was there was a deep consciousness around it. Like you have to be, and then there's the trope, which is unfortunately more correct than not, that Israel's in a dangerous neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right. And so like you are kind of
that is true.
But I think there was where the main difference I think is about Israelis have a sense of sovereignty that makes them respond. It's like a different response.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're seeing now here.
Oh yeah.
Like here, Israelis are all of a sudden like seeing anti-Semitism through like an American experience.
Yeah.
They're like they don't really know how to.
Yeah.
cope.
And it's really sad to see how much it affects American Jews and how much when they become almost like JVP, like Jewish Voices of Peace people, where it's just, they don't realize, like, listen, like, you can be as liberal as you want to be. You can give people the benefit of the doubt as much as possible. You can be as anti-Netanyahu as you want. But at the end of the day, a Nazi is going to kill you because they hate Jews.
Yeah.
And you're a Jew. Yeah. Like, at some point, you got to stand up for yourself,
Yeah. So I don't, thankfully, I don't deal with that side of things. I focus very much on conversations and dialogue with folks who don't necessarily agree in order to kind of to lower the stakes around this, to kind of come against like this world of extremism and recognizing where there's suffering and recognizing where people, there's a price to be paid in violence, and it's an unfortunate reality in which we live. It's a indictment of humanity that we keep such a base species. We're going back to war, and same say, what? Sometimes that is what it is. It is what's going to take, and trying to hold those two at the same time.
At the same time, like, I've learned so much from like Jewish people in terms of how they deal with their grief and how they, I understand how they were able to survive for thousands of years, because if you look at any pro-Palestinian rally, it always devolves into a hate rally. I'm sorry, like, most of them are just anti-Israel rallies, and it's scary, it's violent, it's a negative energy. It's not about solutions and love and about, and I wish that could be created. I think it sucks that there's, this horrible war happening, and people are seeing the suffering of the Palestinian people. I'm seeing the suffering of the Palestinian people, and I want someone to advocate for them, because Hamas doesn't. And even though Israel is waging a war against Hamas, Palestinian people are suffering as a result. And I think that there are a lot of young people who just wish that they could, the spirit of what they're intending to do is to say we care about these people, but it's the organizers and it's the anti-Semitism and it's the unwillingness to coexist and this hate that that comes out of these rallies that is so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And then you see any like Jewish event or pro-Israel event, and it's all like lighting candles and candlelight visuals and music and song and people, you know, standing with each other and holding each other up, and it's the vibrational energy. Like when we did the event at Sundance for the hostage families, like by the end of the night, it was like the energy was like it was like we were in heaven. Like everyone was just, you could feel this enveloped love around our, like, and it's through candles and food and prayer and empathy and listening and being there for each other. Yeah. And I think if we could just, you know, if we could just have that all around, you know, a little more empathy, a little more love, a little more sharing, a little more focusing on solutions, how things can get better, how we can help people, you know, that's the path forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good place we could end.
Yeah,
right?
There we go.
The sense of empathy and ask for more. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it, and it's I look forward to your show.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to be there tonight. This will be aired afterwards. So
yeah.
But thank you really for your time. And
you're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.